And so Richardson finally ended up as superintendent of police on the Welland Canal with a small force trying to control the canalers who were provoked. The Protestant Irish were fighting the Catholic Irish, and there were riots. And at first, the workers were fairly well paid because it was under the government. Then the government sort of contracted things out to American contractors who paid starvation wages, and this caused the rioting and Richardson's problems in trying to control things because the people living round about were very upset. Naturally, by all the problems. There's a picture of St. Catherine's. So this is where he and his wife settled. In England, he'd married again to Caroline Drayson, and they had lived with a minister in St. Catherine's while he went about his business as superintendent. But there were locals who were angry at him for having got the position that they thought they should have got. And he had fired a man from the force who was undermining him. And this man was hired by one of the contractors and sent by him burst into the dining room of the minister's home and arrested Richardson on some trumped-up charge, shocked his wife, and his wife sort of, with all these pressures on Richardson, died of apoplexy. He attributed her death to all these problems, and he buried her from his brother's house in Niagara in the Butler burial ground. Eventually, in Montreal, he met the famous harpist of the day. He'd known him in his early days in London. His name was Nicholas Boxa. He's the most famous harpist of any day. And he had married Anna Bishop, the great singer, stolen her away from her composer husband, Bishop. And they traveled in Europe, and when the 1848 revolutions had set Europe aflame, they came to America. And they were in Montreal, and he said to Richardson, look, give up this. If you want to publish your novels, come to New York City. That's now blossoming as a literary center. And so he did. And there is Castle Gardens in New York City, where you could, it's right at the end of the Battery overlooking the water, and you could sit there and have a cigar, wine, and enjoy yourself. And I suppose Richardson had done that. But the poor man, his books were taken up by some of the publishers, but they only paid him small lump sums. And he eventually died of starvation. Had to sell his dog to have enough to eat. There's one of his books, The Monk Knight of St. John, and that was published in New York. I reprinted it because there were only 3 copies left, and it's a very interesting story about, it starts with the Battle of Tiberias when the Crusaders were defeated by Saladin, and the protagonists come back to Auvergne in France. They developed this 3-way love relationships, which were quite unique for 1850. And the book was never reviewed, but everyone read it, so it was an underground bestseller. And this is a Écarté, which I've already told you about. It's about gambling in Paris, gambling houses. And, it's a brilliant book. It's really a really almost autobiographical in a way. And Frascati's was written with an Irishman whom he knew in Paris. It's about Paris too, but it's about 2 rather wealthy Irishmen who go for a holiday in Paris and are swindled by a group of swindlers. One of the major people of that period is one of the major people of the swindlers is named Major Nimbleton, and I think he should have had should have been acclaimed as one of the great characters of literature. But this book apparently didn't do very well. It's not a great exciting novel. It's done in a humorous fashion, And I suppose the Irishman who wrote it with him, Justin Brennan, he had a more philosophical approach to life, and that came out in the novel. And I just want to read you a bit from my introduction to it, which I quote from the novel to give you a sense of what it's like. Their depiction of the English poets meeting at McHugh's drinking establishment in Paris must have given them great pleasure, skewering the pretensions and egos of former acquaintances. Such practices continue in the pubs and coffee houses to this day. But the author's greatest pleasure must have been in creating the nimble-witted confidence trickster, Major Nimbleton. Here is the delightful description of Nimbleton trying to sneak out of his hotel to avoid paying. The weather at this period, I must premise, was oppressively hot, so much so indeed that one could easily have dispensed with a coat had fashion or custom permitted, even in the shade. Notwithstanding this extreme sultriness, the Major had made his appearance below and was in fact issuing from the hotel for a morning promenade, as he said, with his entire wardrobe on his back. This consisted independently of linen, of 2 or 3 pairs of pantaloons, sundry waistcoats, a body coat, his braided frock, a surtout, and over all these a huge woolly dreadnought. In short, from the superfluity of apparel in which the Major had invested his person, one would have been tempted to imagine that he had dressed for the character of Sir John Falstaff, or the gravedigger in Hamlet. The side pockets of his outer coat were, moreover, filled with other movables, and projected from his hips like the paddles of a steamboat. And with all this sail hoisted, to use a nautical phrase, he was preparing to depart, when, unluckily, his enormous figure caught the vigilant eye of the porteress, who, naturally imagining so much clothing to be somewhat superfluous at such a broiling season of the year, now thought proper to lay an embargo on a vessel that to all appearance was leaving port without a license. That is that book, and there is Westbrook the Outlaw. And this novel was thought not to have existed. I was speaking to the head librarian in the National Archives in Ottawa about it when I was doing my research, and he said scholars thought it was Wakusta by another name. No one ever seen it. Well, I had found a letter in the Philadelphia Archives from Richardson in which he mentioned it, so I knew it existed, and I spent 10 years searching for it, looking through publishers' old files and trying to find the plates and so forth, but I couldn't. And then, just as I was nearing the end of the biography, I had told an old bookseller friend of mine in Manhattan about it, and he called me up and said, "Look, there's a Westbrook being sold at the book auction house 2 blocks from where you're living." So I rushed down. What it was a serialized version, an old newspaper that lain for 120 some odd years in an Albany warehouse, and some jobber had got rid of it and taken it to this book auction house, and that's how it came about. So I put it out, and it's about the trader Andrew Westbrook in the War of 1812, who led American marauders up the Thames River Valley to burn the mills and capture the important citizens for ransom in Kentucky. It's a very interesting Gothic novel, and someone thinks it would make a good movie. Maybe it will be someday. And this is a picture of the Canadian campaign, which I've told you about, Richardson's experiences in the War of 1812.